folks. My name is Commando Kukogo, and welcome to another episode of the Commander's Corner. In the past, we've been discussing the issues of Black Lives Matters, paying reparations to African nations, African leadership, democracy in Africa, and rule of law. And today's episode, I just wanted to touch up a little bit on the cause of African problem. It has multi-layers, but it's important to understand the genesis of African exploitation, African underdevelopment, corruption, and so many problems that has impeded the African nations from advancing forward. Going back to over almost 500 years ago, Africa was enslaved for over 200 years by the European powers. I mean, specifically Britain, the Great Britain, UK, France, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, Germany, and some other small European nations. They made it their almost like their playground to exploit Africa. And they started by trading, and eventually they found the free labor that they could exploit out of Africa. Hence the slavery started. The atrocities of the European nations are well documented. They are written even by them. And over the years, the movement for reparation has been going on. But unfortunately, African nations have not gotten engaged and involved in this demand. That African free labor that were exported out of Africa contributed to over $10 trillion or 8.8 trillion euros to the economy of Europe and to America. So this demand for reparation is made $2 trillion they were asking. And some people say, how can we get this? But it's important that you let those that have injured you understand that a time will come when you begin to demand for compensation, payment for damages. So as the African nations emerge, they have not been able to shake off this cobweb that have beclouded them from moving ahead. When the cost of transporting black Africans to America rose and became unprofitable because of the Industrial Revolution, the emerging machine power, the Europeans decided to partition Africa at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. This was the cause of most of Africa's borders problem today. The creation of African borders were never done by Africans. This conference was called by the German Chancellor Bismarck to settle how European countries would claim Africa land for themselves. And this was also done to avoid wars amongst the nations. That if they sit down and they carve out Africa in whichever manner they choose, it will save them the money of going to war to fight for Africa. In fact, they believe Africa was what? Nothing to fight for, but to exploit. The Chancellor reasoned that for fighting for Africa would take away the resources that they will use to develop themselves. So they will be better to sit down peacefully, carve out Africa, and then get whatever you can get at the expense of the black people. This partition resulted in the jigsaw look of the maps of Africa. Countries were carved out and carved up without regard to culture, civilization, history, tribe, and religion. This was the pitiful condition that started the problem of building African nations and countries. Africa was divided without consideration of local population or pre-existing cultural groups. The result was that most African borders were the products of European geopolitical rivalries rather than West African history and aspirations. I say the word West Africa because that's where I came from. But this thing was all over Africa. In Kenya, in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Ghana, in the Zambia, the Gambia, Senegal, the same thing. There were never consideration given to existing cultural norms, population, cultures, tribes. And these African borders were the product of European geopolitical rivalries rather than African history and aspirations. And this explains why most African borders were created in European chancelleries and followed astronomical, mathematical, or geographical lines that were drawn in faraway place of Europe. For example, Congo Free State became the personal possession of Leopold II, the King of Belgium, the criminal King of Belgium. Leopold II had been one of the most instigators of the formal European land and power grab in Africa, and was personally rewarded for this role. The result would be the creation of one of the most inhuman of all European colonial systems established in Africa. King Leopold of Belgium committed the worst genocide in the world by killing over 30 million Africans in Congo. Soon, Belgium will make Belgium to pay. When Belgium begins to close its borders for migrating Africans, they forgot that they killed over 30 millions of Africans, exploited the natural resources in Africa, was complicit in the killing of Patrick Lumumba with the CIA. So why should they stop Africans from coming to live in Belgium, to partake in the nation that was built with the resources of the Congo? The scramble for Africa, partition of Africa, or the conquest of Africa was the invasion, occupation, division, and colonization of African territory by European powers during a short period known in history and historians as the New Imperialism, which existed between 1881 and 1914. At the end of the New Imperialism in 1914, Nigeria was amalgamated. Nigeria was formed for economic reasons, and later, people from different and independent regions were forced against their wills to form a colonial country, given a genuine choice. Many people then, or perhaps a plebiscite, Fulani people would never, I know, like to be in the same country with non-Northern Muslim people. Likewise, the other regions of the country, Igbos, may never like to be in the same country as the Northern Fulanis, especially in the Federated Union. The Second World War exposed Europe. It made an European man almost equal to the black man. It exposed major European colonial powers and showed their vulnerability. These facts gave rise to the demand for independence by Africans queuing up as the countries created by imperialists. Africans began to agitate for independence. It was not agitation to create their own country. It was agitation to maintain the status quo, keep the borders, but be the major players. Most of the new African independent leaders and nations failed to manage the affairs of their new independent status because they continued to operate like the European powers. They did not reorganize their states, and the most tragic was the efforts of their erstwhile colonial masters to sabotage and cause them to fail. They agreed to maintain the borders, the names, the language of the colonial masters. In so doing, they were propagating what the European powers had created in their partition. And like I said, unfortunately, these European masters had designed a system to weaken and sabotage these new emerging African nations who were celebrating their independence. But they were never independent. Africa have accepted the European created countries and have devoted much resources in defending them. This attitude has caused too many coups, illegal replacement of national government with force, regional conflicts, discriminations, clashes, and devastating wars. Resources that could have been used to develop these nations were wasted to protect imperial wisdom. No African nation has withdrawn its border since 1885 without engaging in war. Even after wars, many have remained as they were created. Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, you can name so many. They fought against each other so that they can maintain the borders and the institutions that were created by the colonial masters. Now, the new world, the new craze is democracy. Supposedly the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Designed to operate as pure representative of the people, chosen by the people and operated by the people. But I ask you, is it a true analogy? Borrowing Western system or our collective failure to design and implement our own political system? We said we want to be independent, but we're saying the only way we can be independent is that we do, is that we use, is that we implement the system that the master had designed for us. You know, democracy refers to a form of government where a constitution guarantees basic personal and political rights, fairness, fair and free elections, and independent courts of law. These are things that make democracy work. Can one argue that these values exist in any African country? These aforementioned values that would promote and guarantee democracy. Of course, There is no doubt that gradually Africa is embracing this phenomenon with checkered success, apprehension, and trepidation. Good governance starts with good leadership, personality, sacrifice, and patriotism. But I don't know any African leader, past and present, who truly reflects these attributes. Autocracy, dictatorship, social and political instability have for too long held Africa back as dark cloud over the country, over the continent, I mean. Is it Africa practicing democracy, or are the leaders on the continent making substantial changes to turn the continent around for better, ensuring democracy and good governance? I don't know. I don't know. People told me that Rwanda is the emerging Singapore, that they are practicing democracy. South Africa is practicing democracy. Ghana is practicing democracy. But of the 54 countries in Africa, there are only 11 democracies. And out of that 11, 7 can stand on their 2 feet as democracy. Others are autocracy. People come to power. They were elected for 4 years. They want to stay for life. After they die, they pass it over to their friend, or rather friends becomes an enterprise, to their family members. That is the story of all African democracies. But in order for the democratic system to bear fruit, politicians and authorities need to uphold the Constitution. Signed Constitution that everybody agrees to abide by. Those on top, the leaders, they must uphold the Constitution. To further democracy, the following must be allowed and adhered to. There must be an organized and accepted election result. The elections must be free and fair. There must be peaceful transfer of power. After an election, the contestants must accept the result and be willing to hand over power without subjecting the nation into war or disorder. There must be tolerance of opposition, because the strength of democracy is an accepted role of opposition in the country. There must be retirement of leaders. People should not make politics business. Politicians should serve and live. 4 years, 8 years, 10 years. There should be a term limit. When you have a 70-year-old parading and acting as the leader of youth, or rather youth leader, whatever they call him, something is wrong there. A youth leader should not be older than 40 years old. But you have this person that have overexhausted their political usefulness just to contain them and be around the corridors of power. They accept to be youth leader at 70 years old. There must be establishment of democratic institutions. These institutions should function independent of whoever is in power. They are set up to serve democracy. They are not set up to serve political parties or individuals. There must be law and order. We must hold politicians accountable for their actions while in power, in office. There should be no man should be above the law. When you are made head of an organization or department of government, you must be held accountable. If you are a leader of NDDC, acting or whatever capacity, you must give account of your stewardship. You cannot come to a public hearing and be fainting, pretending, faking. You cannot give account of 20 billion naira, 40 billion naira, 70 billion naira. You should be a resident of a prison yard. There should be law and order. There should be free speech and the right to assemble. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech. You cannot suppress free speech in democracy, because free speech is a part of that government of the people, by the people, for the people. The people should speak. People should oppose. People should express themselves. A good government should have a mechanism, organ of listening to the people, whether they like it or not. In so doing, they'll be able to adjust, change, modify to serve the citizens' right. And of course, there must be human rights. We must respect human rights. Everybody, man, woman, Christian, Muslim, non-religious person, a child, an older person, it doesn't really matter. Human right is human right. And I know that almost every constitution in all African nations recognize human rights. But tell me where it's practiced. I don't know. The new push for change and democracy in Africa is driven by social media. When I say social media, I mean Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, and other influential platforms for accountability, due process, and exposure of illegalities. Since 1999, Nigeria started practicing democracy with a glass half full, half empty syndrome. These affirmations are evident in corruption, ineptitude of government, unmerited appointment of unqualified kinsmen and allies, persistent ethnic unrest, and poor social services. Democracy in Nigeria is ridiculous and laughable. It's like transforming living stones into flowers. The practice cannot achieve intended result because Nigeria is not a country with no rightful path to emerge as one people with one destiny. It is really a waste of time. The politicians in Nigeria are the most corrupt in the African continent. I usually say in the world. The criminal elements in its camps operate without fear and the consequence. They act lawlessly, openly, and freely. The last 20 years of democracy in Nigeria are indeed wasted opportunities to transform the country into true giant of Africa. Instead, it has failed beyond imagination. Nigeria is among the poorest nations in the world, and the future forecast is bleak. Today, Nigeria is more dependent on foreign goods and service than in 1960 when it got its independence. There are no real peace and securities, dependable infrastructures, quality education, growing economy, and dependable power supply. No, they don't exist. If you want any of this, you have to provide it yourself. If you build a house, you have to provide water for yourself, borehole. You have to provide electricity for yourself, power generation machine. You have to provide security by building 20-foot wall. You have to build your own road. You have, literally, there are no services that you can depend on by the government. None. Health, school, they don't exist. The country only exists in vacuum. They only exist in that creation by the white man in 1914. That's what it is. What are the dividends of democracy? The jury is still debating, but the words on the streets says failure. 90% failure. Freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, and religion are restricted by government and attacked by rogue groups like Boko Haram, Fulani herdsmen, Miyati Allah, the Niger Delta Boys, and other rogue political formations that are bent on extracting everything freely, forcefully from the people. The next 20 years may be worse than we experience today because of low national revenue, international oil glut, unrest, and religious intolerance may implode catastrophically, that Nigeria may cease to exist as we know it today. I am very doubtful, and I have my reasons. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that the country can change. I hope that the leaders will understand their failures and try to change. I hope that the people will understand that their government have failed them and will find a reason to change. I don't know. So I want to thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I really want to hear from you. Commando Kukok.